York City, the global epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. In our city alone, there are more than 147,000 cases of the coronavirus, and we have suffered over 14,000 deaths. While we are waiting for the President of the United States, whom we expect at any moment, we'd like to try to answer some of your questions, so please type them in the comments and we will answer as many as we can. I want to start with some good news today. For the third straight day, New York State's daily coronavirus death toll has been under 500. Now, it's appalling to look at nearly 500 deaths and call that good news. But honestly, after the horrific days that our state has gone through, it is in fact a hopeful sign that the social distancing we've been doing is working. And if you're in another state that has not implemented as intense social distancing, or that is not yet experiencing the brunt of this virus, I hope that you can look at us and learn from what we've done right to avoid the worst of what we have had to face. Since it is Earth Day, here is some more good news. There is cleaner air all around the world because of these shutdowns. Major cities have seen a reduction of particle matter in the air up to 60% from last year over just the past 3 weeks. Now, even if you're a climate skeptic, which you shouldn't be, the science is settled on that. We need to reverse climate change or our planet will become uninhabitable for future generations. But even if you don't buy into that, you can buy into the fact that the air you are breathing now is cleaner, it is safer, it is healthier for you, it is less of a risk to people with asthma, it is less of a risk to children with developing lungs. So it is good news. If the president says, he frequently says that the air is cleaner than it has ever been, that's not true, but it is true that it is cleaner in the past 3 weeks than it has been in a long time. Experts with the Global Carbon Project say that the worldwide shutdowns could bring CO2 emissions down by 5%. That is not enough to combat the climate crisis, but it is the biggest single one-year drop since World War II. So let's take the good news where we can find it. Again, if you're just joining us, I am Alan Piper, and you are watching NowThis daily live fact check of the President's coronavirus briefings, and we are expecting the President at any moment. We're going to try to answer your questions, so please type them in the comments. President Trump honored Earth Day today by planting a tree. Of course, while in office, he has also rolled back over 90 different environmental protection regulations and worked to help boost the fossil fuel industry. In fact, he is pushing to have a fossil fuel industry bailout in the next round of coronavirus relief packages. Some of his rollbacks include significantly weakening methane regulations, repealing an Obama-era clean water regulation, weakening the Endangered Species Act. He's also tried to make it easier for big game hunters like his sons to bring the carcasses of endangered animals back into the country after killing them. He has implemented rules to keep coal plants open, and he has rolled back land protections from drilling. So there's that. He continues to push for rapidly reopening the country, even though the U.S. has added more than 26,000 new cases since yesterday. More than 2,100 Americans have died of the virus in the last 24 hours alone. That is not quite as many as were killed in the 9/11 attacks, but we are at a point where we are looking at the equivalent of a 9/11 attack almost every day. The current death toll in the U.S. is over 46,000. That is more than 10 times the U.S. death toll of the Iraq War. Again, if you're just joining us, I'm Alan Piper. If you are interested in following me on Twitter, I am apiper13, although I do not tweet nearly as much as the President of the United States does. We would like to try to answer your questions while we are waiting. I have one from Reese. Reese says, so who's against opening the country so fast? I think it's a bad idea right now. The answer is you are in good company. An NBC News Wall Street Journal poll found that nearly 60% of Americans across party lines are concerned that the government will too quickly lift coronavirus restrictions. So, Reese, I hope that helps. Everyone else, type your questions in the comments and we will work to answer them. Now, there has been some embarrassing news this week for President Trump and Fox News on the matter of hydroxychloroquine. As you'll recall, the president and his favorite TV station had been aggressively urging people to take it, even though there was no solid evidence that it was effective against the coronavirus. They maintain that it has nothing to do with the fact that Trump has financial ties to two of the companies that make it. President Trump famously asked, what do you have to lose? The answer is possibly your life. The first nationwide U.S. study suggests that it is of no benefit in fighting the coronavirus. And in fact, more patients in this study who took it died than those who didn't. Additional news that came out today, a doctor leading the charge on developing a coronavirus vaccine. Remember, President Trump talks about how close we are to a coronavirus vaccine and how fervently he is pushing for it. A doctor leading the charge, working with HHS, was removed from his post after seeking further research on hydroxychloroquine, after basically questioning the president's statements on it. Not questioning in a challenging way, questioning in a scientific, how can we find out if this is true kind of way. Dr. Rick Bright, the Director of Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority at HHS, was moved to another position within the NIH. He told the New York Times, quote, I believe this transfer was in response to my insistence that the government invest billions of dollars allocated by Congress to address the COVID-19 pandemic into safe and scientifically vetted solutions, and not in drugs, vaccines, and other technologies that lack scientific merit. So, the president is likely to be asked about that today. You'll notice he hasn't been talking about the hydroxychloroquine quite so much lately. You'll also notice that Dr. Fauci has been noticeably absent from these briefings. He hasn't been at the last 5. The hashtag #FireFauci began trending after Dr. Fauci admitted to CNN the not factually controversial piece of information that, yes, if the president had taken action a little bit earlier, that could possibly have saved some lives. The next day, Dr. Fauci practically was the first exhibition at the daily briefing where he, in the cadence of a hostage video recitation, sort of walked back those claims, and he has scarcely been heard from since. Dr. Fauci, if you're out there, we all hope that you're okay. Jose asks, any news on the immigration pause? We are likely to hear more information about that today. President Trump tweeted today that he would be signing it. He announced this idea late at night on Monday, seemingly taking his entire administration by surprise yet again. He then tweeted today that he would be signing an executive order today. That, to our knowledge, has not happened yet. He clarified yesterday that the forthcoming executive order barring new immigration would apply only to people seeking green cards. It is supposedly only going to last 60 days and won't affect workers entering the country on a temporary basis. Shelby, I see. Oh, thank you, Shelby. And also, just an apology in advance to everyone. We are all working from home. I'm broadcasting from my own apartment in New York's East Village. I am not on the White House press briefing, even though my curtains appear to be the same color as the room. I'm here in my living room, often with cats jumping on my keyboard. I had a momentary fluctuation in our household internet, and if you saw that, I apologize for that. Jose, I'm going to try to continue answering your question. Over the course of recent weeks, the Trump administration has made more than a dozen changes to the U.S. immigration system, citing the coronavirus pandemic. Many experts speculate that the president is trying to use this crisis to advance policies that he sought to implement anyway. As we know, he and Stephen Miller have sought to limit not just the number of undocumented immigrants that come to this country, but also has sought to limit legal documented immigration. Though not, I would note, when it pertains to his own family. He did fast track the citizenship requests of his in-laws, the parents of Melania. That would be what he would normally call chain migration, what most people refer to as family-based immigration. Anyway, it does appear that the president may be trying to use this crisis as an excuse to make this country less hospitable to immigrants of all kinds. He has shut down the southern border entirely, which means that all legal asylum seekers are now being turned away. They are not being processed. And this 60-day restriction seems a little fishy because, first of all, most international travel is already shut down. The southern and northern borders are closed. International flights are almost entirely suspended. So it's not likely that a lot of people would be able to enter the country anyway at this point, nor is it so likely that they would want to enter at this specific moment when the U.S. leads the world in coronavirus cases. We account for about 31% of all the world's coronavirus cases. We have more cases not only than any one other country, but more than the next 4 countries combined. So it's not like there is a stream of people eagerly coming here right at this moment. It really does seem that these restrictions are being placed more out of an opportunistic action to never let a good crisis go to waste and implement policies that he wanted to implement anyway, and possibly shore up support with his base. As I said, refugee resettlement has been put on hold. Visa offices are largely closed. Citizenship ceremonies aren't happening. The administration is swiftly removing migrants, including children arrested at the border, and there are a slew of other ongoing changes. Liz asks, will they ever vote on a second relief stimulus package? Well, the Senate yesterday passed an additional $484 billion worth of aid. The House is expected to vote on it tomorrow. This package replenishes funds for the Paycheck protection program that ran out of money last week. Now, while most businesses who were able to apply are still waiting on those loans to be funded, this new bill gives $100 billion also directly to hospitals to expand further testing capabilities in the states. Democrats fought hard for that. Republicans wanted to keep it solely focused on the business loans. The business loans are supposedly just for small businesses, but the AP has uncovered that at least 75 major corporations have actually benefited from the program so far. It also includes this latest round of funding includes an extra $1 billion in funding to the CDC. President Trump in February had sought to cut the CDC's budget by 16%, but this gives it some more funding, which it will need to face this crisis. What is noticeably absent from this latest bill is any additional funding for states and local governments. States and local governments are really having their budgets hurt by this crisis. People are not shopping, so sales tax is down. People are not working, so payroll tax is down. All the ways that states and cities usually make money are even things like licenses and fees. People aren't getting licenses. They aren't getting their marriage licenses. They aren't getting their business licenses. So cities and states are really feeling the pinch. And unfortunately, the areas most likely to face that pinch are some of the most essential services. Right now, while we are counting on our hospitals, hospitals are running out of money that would come from state and local governments. Fire departments, police departments, schools are running out of money, and there is no aid for helping states and cities meet their budget crises in this latest package of legislation. And Mitch McConnell has expressed very adamantly that he has no interest in adding anything like that anytime soon. Nor is there additional relief for citizens. A reminder, some 22 million Americans have lost their jobs in just the past 3 weeks. People are wondering where their next rent check is going to come from. And while many Americans have received the single $1,200 payment that was allocated, it was promised to have been delivered to everyone by direct deposit by April 17th, but that hasn't happened. It's happened for many Americans, but not for all. Many Americans are still waiting on the payment. And for the 15 million Americans who don't have bank accounts, you're going to have to wait for physical checks. The IRS was already expecting that the checks could take until September to issue, and that was before it got held up with the additional delay of the fact that reportedly President Trump insisted that his name be printed on the checks. So if you are waiting either for direct deposit or for a physical check, you could be waiting for quite some time to come. Also, there is nothing in that $1,200 that takes into account where you live. If you live here in New York, $1,200 probably does not pay your monthly rent. If you live in Mitch McConnell's Kentucky, it could well pay a month's rent on a 3-bedroom house. But there's no geographic difference between who got what. It was just $1,200 for most middle to low income Americans. Faye asks, Faye asks related to that. Faye was asking, will there be a second stimulus check? As I said, Mitch McConnell has been adamantly opposed to that. There is none of that in this most recent package that passed the Senate. Democrats in Congress have been asking for direct release for American families. There is a plan from Congresswomen Rashida Tlaib, Pramila Jayapal, and from others, from other members of Congress, including Ro Khanna and Tim Ryan. They are asking for more direct relief for Americans. Many countries are experimenting with different forms of direct relief. Former Labor Secretary Robert Reich is suggesting that the Treasury pay companies, just say companies, keep everyone on the payroll, don't apply for loans, just keep making your payroll, and the U.S. government should just commit to meeting that payroll. It's uncharted territory, but clearly $1,200 alone is not going to be enough for most Americans if this continues, as it seems that it will. All right, another question comes in. Can states open without meeting the Phase 1 requirements in President Trump's 4-phase plan for reopening the country? The answer is that President Trump announced those guidelines for states to begin reopening their economies, but the decisions ultimately lie with each state. Georgia's governor has said that his state is going to start reopening on Friday. This in spite of the fact that his state has seen an increase of 1,000 new cases since yesterday. There was 1,000 new cases the day before that. Even President Trump says that you should have 2 weeks of reduced number of cases before you start opening things up. But when he was specifically asked about Georgia yesterday, he said that he thought Georgia would be fine because he was sure that these businesses that would be reopening this week will practice social distancing so that everyone remains 6 feet apart. The businesses that are reopening include hair salons and tattoo parlors. I was the senior editor on New York Inc. on TLC. I've watched a lot of tattoos. I don't think you can give a tattoo from 6 feet away. Okay, maybe Ami James could figure out a way to do it. I don't think you can. Megan Massacre could figure out a way to do it. Megan Massacre, if you have a plan to give people a tattoo from 6 feet away, we want to hear about it on NowThis. William asks, what is the total death toll for the country so far? And William, I'm sorry to have to tell you that as of today, according to Johns Hopkins, the number is 46,399 people in this country who have died from the coronavirus. For context, that is more than 10 times the number of U.S. service members who died in the Iraq War. There are to date in the U.S. 846,982 positive cases. That is an increase of 26,000 cases and then some since yesterday. But the real numbers could be much higher because we still do not have widespread testing in the country. To date, there are only 4.1 million tests have been performed in the U.S. That amounts to about 1.2% of the population. In New York, the backlog of bodies has so overwhelmed morgues and funeral homes that the city has had to dig temporary mass graves on public land. Other states have been facing the grim toll as well. Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz said that the state recorded its highest number of coronavirus infections and deaths since the pandemic began in the last 24 hours. This, while the President of the United States is urging protesters to, quote, liberate Minnesota. Ashley asks, are COVID-19 tests covered by the government in the U.S.? And the answer is that Medicare, Medicaid, and other government plans and most private plans are now supposed to cover COVID-19 testing and all testing related to services entirely. However, the law doesn't explicitly prohibit charging you if you go out to an out-of-network provider. On top of that, many insurance companies have agreed to waive copays for treatment for the disease itself, but not all. Dominic asks, so are we opening up or not? Just wondering, I heard the casino and restaurants in the casinos would not be opening up. Well, it is a different story depending on where you live. Some states and cities have begun the process of reopening their economies, despite warnings from public health officials that it is too soon. Health experts at Harvard say that the country needs to be doing about 500,000 to 700,000 tests a day to figure out if the spread of the disease is controlled enough to be able for us to reopen. The U.S. is currently only doing about 150,000 tests a day. 20,000 of those tests are being done in New York City, in New York State at least. New York State leads the nation in testing, and even New York State does not have the sufficient testing to know how we're coping here. One of the largest hospitals in New York is no longer allowing doctors and nurses to be tested if they're not presenting symptoms because tests are not sufficiently available. Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia, you will remember, Brian Kemp was elected governor of Georgia in a very close election that seemed to hinge on voter suppression. As Secretary of State, he questionably purged large numbers of voters, seemingly disproportionately black voters, from Georgia's voting rolls. And it seems to have been, and he did that as Secretary of State for the state while he was running for governor of the state. And it seemed to have been potentially the deciding factor in his winning the election over Stacey Abrams. In fact, while she acknowledged that she lost the election, when she acknowledged that, she specifically stated that she was not conceding, because she did not concede that the election was fairly won. She has gone on to become a voting rights activist for the nation and founded the group Fair Fight, and she is working to make sure that every American's vote is protected. So, sorry, that was the backstory on Brian Kemp. The question was about Kemp's efforts to reopen the state. He announced on Monday, taking many mayors in his state by surprise, he announced that he would allow nail salons, massage therapists, bowling alleys and gyms, tattoo parlors to reopen on Friday. Restaurants and movie theaters would open on Monday. Again, President Trump said he was sure that these businesses would find a way to maintain 6 feet of social distance. Really? You're going to get a massage from 6 feet away? Not sure how that would be done. Kemp is facing blowback for his announcement. Even outspoken conservative Senator Lindsey Graham from neighboring South Carolina tweeted that he's worried that Kemp is acting too soon and that these actions will endanger not just Georgians, but people in neighboring states like South Carolina. The mayors of both Atlanta and Athens said that Kemp was moving too quickly and urged residents to refrain from resuming life as normal. All right. Albert asks a question. Why did Cuomo deny hospitals the use of hydroxychloroquine? The short answer is he didn't. All right. So we are seeing the first members of the task force come out now. I see Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci, I'm relieved to see you. We've been worried about you. We haven't seen you in 4 days. I'm glad you're back. I hope you will be allowed to speak. We see Dr. Birx. We see Dr. Redfield of the CDC. Dr. Redfield was quoted this week saying that he believes that it is likely that there will be a resurgence of the coronavirus in the fall, and that it could hit us even worse because we could be having a simultaneous resurgence of the coronavirus and just regular flu. President Trump tweeted that Redfield was misquoted and said that an official clarification would be coming soon. I expect we might see a hostage video style statement from Redfield today as part of the briefing. The question from Albert was on hydroxychloroquine. Cuomo never banned the use of hydroxychloroquine. He did, however, sign an executive order on March 23rd aimed at restricting access to the drug to limit panic buying and stockpiling. You'll remember that President Trump, even though it was not proven to be a successful treatment for the coronavirus, was actively urging people, take it. What have you got to lose? And unfortunately, this drug, which is essential for many people who take it for the uses it's approved for, including lupus and many other conditions, including malaria, they've been finding a shortage of it because people have been stockpiling it. Governor Cuomo sought to stop that. And here comes the President of the United States, so I'm going to turn it over to him, and my team and I will do our best to fact-check him in real time. Once again, my audio has gone out, so I am going to, hold on, I'm going to go to a different source. Watch my very super high-tech broadcast from home system.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. A lot of tremendous things are happening. The number of new positive cases continue to decline nationwide.
That's not exactly true. As I told you, there were over 26,000 new cases since yesterday. While the rate of new cases may be slowing, the number of cases is absolutely not declining.
In the Boston area are now declining. The Chicago curve appears to have flattened, which is terrific, and Detroit has passed its peak. These trends demonstrate that our aggressive strategy to battle the virus is working, and that more states will soon be in a position to gradually and safely reopen. That's very exciting. It was very exciting even today watching and seeing what's happening, and people are getting ready and they're all excited. I do want to mention a man who's done a very good job for us, Dr. Robert Redfield, was totally misquoted in the media on a statement about the fall season and the virus. Totally misquoted. I spoke to him. He said it was ridiculous. He was talking about the flu and corona coming together at the same time. And corona could be just some little flare-ups that we'll take care of. We're going to knock it out. We'll knock it out fast. But that's what he was referring to, coming together at the same time. And I think rather than waiting, I'd ask Dr. Redfield to come up and say a couple of words just to straighten that out, because he didn't say it was a big explosion. The headline in the Washington Post was totally inaccurate. The statement wasn't bad in the Post, but the headline was ridiculous, which is, as I say, that's fake news, and CNN is fake news like crazy, and they had just totally the wrong story, which they knew. They were asked to change it, and they wouldn't do that, and it was false. So I'll ask Dr. Redfield, who is a real professional, to come up and explain, please. Thank you, Doc.
So this is a pattern that we have seen. This is with Dr. Fauci on last Monday, where a public health official says something that is medically accurate, but that is not pleasing to President Trump, and then President Trump trots them out in the press briefing and has them recant their statement, which they awkwardly do while trying to remain medically accurate.
Important to emphasize what I didn't say. I didn't say that this was going to be worse. I said it was going to be more complicated or more difficult and potentially complicated because we'll have flu and coronavirus circulating at the same time. I want to emphasize that we continue to build the nation's public health infrastructure to ensure that we have the capacity to stay in the containment mode. Those of you who heard me talk before, I've told you that in January and February.
Okay, so this is interesting. President Trump said that the Washington Post is fake news, and it completely misquoted Dr. Redfield. Dr. Redfield came out and said, here's what I really said, and what he just said is what he really said is basically the exact same thing that is in the Washington Post. He told the Post, there's a possibility that the assault of the virus on our nation next winter will actually be even more difficult than the one we just went through. We're going to have the flu epidemic and the coronavirus epidemic at the same time. This does not seem to actually be in contradiction with what he just said. So President Trump's accusation of fake news appears to be more fake news itself.
Mode. Again, that will be supported by the American public's continued cooperation, obviously in the areas of personal hygiene and the types of social distancing strategies that may be appropriate. The key to my comments, and the reason that I really wanted to stress them, was to appeal to the American public to embrace the flu vaccine with confidence. One of the greatest tools we have as we go through the fall, winter season that we're into is to get the American public to embrace the influenza vaccine and thereby minimize the impact of flu to be the co-respiratory disease that we confront.
By the way, on the topic of vaccines, President Trump has fed into anti-vax conspiracy theories himself.
Totally misquoted. He said they could come together. They didn't talk about that. And his whole purpose in making the statement was to get a flu shot so that next fall we don't have such a big season of flu. and we possibly won't. But as you said, it's possible if the corona even comes back, and he doesn't know that it's going to, and neither do I. We spoke at great length, and I think the doctor will speak if you'd like to continue, but we may have some embers, and we're going to put them out, of corona, but we may have a big flu season. But that's different. Flu is very different from corona.
Ask you a follow-up question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Dr. Redfield, the Washington Post, which you did the interview with them, they quoted you as saying there's a possibility that the assault of the virus on our nation next winter will actually be even more difficult than the one we just went through. And when I've said this to others, they've kind of put their head back. They don't understand what I mean. We're going to have the flu epidemic and the coronavirus epidemic at the same time. Is that what you said to the Washington Post?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say to you just a minute ago, that the issue that I was talking about.
So he just confirmed that the Washington Post's report accurately quoted him.
Spring that we just went through, February, we had a benefit of having the flu season ended. So we could use all our flu surveillance systems to say, whoops, this is coronavirus. We need to focus. Next fall and winter, we are going to have two viruses circulating. And we're going to have to distinguish between which is flu and which is the coronavirus. And so the comment that I made, it's more difficult. Doesn't mean it's going to be more impossible. Doesn't mean it's going to be more, as some people have said, worse. It just means it's more difficult because we have to distinguish between the two. And what I was wanting to do, and what I want to do again here, is appeal to the American public to recognize they can really help like they did with mitigation, which they really helped. I need them to help now to best prepare us by getting the flu vaccine and taking flu out of the picture.
But excuse me.
They may not even have corona coming back, just so you understand. Doctor, would you like
No, but I'm sorry, but that quote that I just read was accurate, right, sir? Because that's the quote from the Washington Post. You were accurately quoted, correct?
I'm accurately quoted in the Washington Post as difficult. But the headline was
different. What does the headline say?
Well,
Read the headline.
The headline says CDC director warns second wave of coronavirus is likely to be even more devastating. And isn't that
That's not
correct?
what he said.
Because,
That's not what he said.
but if you have the two things
The
happening,
headline doesn't correspond.
No, I
to
actually
the
think
story.
it's actually going to be, I think the American public is going to heed the request to relook at their vaccine hesitancy to vaccine with confidence for flu. And I'm confident that the public health infrastructure that we're putting together now across this country so that we can early case diagnose, isolate, and contact trace. As I say, block and tackle, block and tackle. That system is going to be there, and we're going to be able to contain this virus.
Why did you retweet the article if it was inaccurate? Dr. Why did you retweet it?
You weren't called.
So we talked about this yesterday when you asked me this question, and someone I think used the word devastating, and I want to really again emphasize to the American public that when we first interacted with this virus for the first time in the February and March timeframe, we didn't have an understanding of its transmissibility, all of its symptoms. We do now. And I think what we are building together when we talk about the public health infrastructure, it is very much working on the surveillance piece, but I think we also know the strength of the American people and their ability to immediately understand how to protect themselves with not touching their face, making sure that they're washing their hands. But the other piece I wanted to talk about, and we mentioned yesterday also, that we have this summer, while we have flu surveillance that we can utilize and syndromic management that we can utilize, we have all of that time to prepare clearly the testing algorithm that you would need in a flu potentially if COVID came back. Potentially. And so we are preparing for that potential right now, and I think we spoke to you all about that and talked about how we're not only preparing for today and tomorrow, but we're preparing for 6 months from now, 3 months from now, and making sure that all of these pieces are in place. I think what Dr. Redfield clearly was asking for, just like we asked for every American to follow the guidelines, he's saying please add to that guidelines getting your flu shot and making sure you're
When you say
protected.
there's a good chance that COVID will not come back.
We don't
And or
know.
if it comes back, it's in a very small confined area that we put out.
Well,
Go ahead.
the great thing is we'll be able to find it earlier this time. And I think that's what we're talking about. We'll find those cases earlier. So what Dr. Redfield said, we would be able to stay in containment phase. And what we're also hoping, and we talked about this about 4 or 5 weeks ago, that we're hoping that the flu infections also go down because people are much more aware of respiratory illnesses and how to protect themselves. We want you to get your vaccine, but we also want to also protect individuals from getting the flu because of the vulnerability we know in certain populations to flu and the devastating outcomes to flu. We could prevent and decrease both of those things. So I think we are assured that the CDC is putting in place today what we are going to need in the fall so that we can stay in containment if potentially the virus comes back.
And if it comes back, though, it won't be coming back in the form that it was. It will be coming back in smaller doses that we can contain. But what the doctor was saying, and I spoke to him at great length, he was saying if it should come back together, now you have a flu and you have the embers of corona. But in my opinion, from everything I've seen, it can never be like anything that we've witnessed right now. Would you say that's the correct statement?
Absolutely.
It's nothing like what we're talking about. What we've just gone through, we will not go through. You could have some embers of corona and you could have a big flu system. And if they combine, if they come together, it's not great, but we will not go through what we went through for the last 2 months. Yeah,
Mr. President,
is that a correct statement?
I understand that the United States will certainly be more prepared in the fall, but how can you say that you know it won't come back in the same level that it has today?
What it is estimated, it might not come back at all, Jeff. It may not come back at all. He's talking about a worst case scenario where you have a big flu and you have some corona. And if it does come back, it's not going to come back. And I've spoken to 10 different people. It's not going to be like it was.
This is so striking. Dr. Birx just expressed a likelihood of it returning. Dr. Redfield expressed a likelihood of it returning. Dr. Fauci expressed a likelihood of it returning. And President Trump is trying to poo-poo the idea very much in the same way that he poo-pooed the idea of this being a real threat all throughout February and half of March.
Anything near what we went through. But you could have a mess where they come at the same time. And if they come at the same time, the flu is not the greatest thing in the world, Jeff. It's not the greatest thing either. If they come at the same time, you have them both. But if we have embers of corona coupled with the flu, that's not going to be pleasant, but it's not going to be what we've gone through in any way, shape, or form. Yeah.
If you don't think that it's going to come back at the same severity it is right now, why are you still directing that taxpayer dollars to spend on emergency procurement of ventilators? Tens of thousands.
Because we have to have them for other reasons. Something else could come. I mean, we didn't know about corona. Now we know about corona. But look at what happened. And now we did have the H1N1 swine flu. We had that. We have other things that have happened. We had various forms of flu, but nothing like what we've had here. Nothing at all like what we've had here with the virus. But something could happen. I think that the stockpiles, we're making hundreds of thousands of ventilators right now. Nobody writes about that. You know, at the one time, all they talked about was ventilators, right? Because you didn't think it was possible for me to solve that problem. And I solved it, and nobody can believe it. I just spoke to world leaders today who desperately need ventilators. They said the job you...
So the president has just said a really disturbing and insulting thing that he's been saying a lot lately. He just suggested that the only reason that people were asking for ventilators is because they thought that he couldn't deliver on them. This is an idea that he expressed repeatedly in the past couple days. I want to highlight that ventilators are saving lives. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,600 people on ventilators here in the state of New York. They are saving lives. People ask for ventilators for medical reasons, not as an effort to make the president look bad.
We've done more than any other nation in the world. Go a step further. If you added up the testing of every nation in the world, put them together, we've done substantially more than that.
The president is misleading on testing. We have done a very large raw number of tests, but testing per capita, we are behind most other nations that we would want to compare ourselves to. We rank 42nd in the world. It is very striking. keep bringing up the fact that Germany began working on tests in January before they had a single case of the coronavirus. South Korea, which diagnosed its first case on the same day as the United States, put a nationwide system of testing in place within 2 weeks. We are now, months later, still only beginning to get a nationwide testing system in place.
Wrote about the ventilators. And when we became the king of ventilators, we're making different factories all over, ventilators, by the thousands. In fact, Mike got back from Wisconsin. First thing he did, he called up. I said, how's it going? He said, you're not going to believe. He just saw a plant, a factory, where they're making ventilators. I think I can say the words were unbelievable. He said it was unbelievable when he saw the quality of the equipment, the professionalism, a tremendous number of, how many workers would you say were there?
Over 550. They doubled production and are about to triple production.
Nobody thought this could be done. The fake news was very unhappy that it was done. But you guys don't ask me about ventilators anymore.
Who's unhappy that
Everybody,
ventilators
everybody,
are being made, Mr.
because you
President?
never mention it. You never mention it. There's no stories. What a great job we've done with ventilators. We're now supplying ventilators all over the world because no other country could have done what we did. And you should say that's a great story. Instead, you say Trump was slow or slow. We were so fast. Plus, we put the ban on so much earlier. When Nancy Pelosi, as an example, you don't say this, when she's having her rally in San Francisco, in Chinatown in San Francisco, nobody wants to say that. If we didn't, and Dr. Fauci said this.
All right, I don't want to take the time to fully debunk his whole repeatedly debunked statement about Nancy Pelosi holding rallies in San Francisco, in Chinatown. It's not true, but I don't want to get into it because there's so much else going on here.
Nobody wrote it. Germany and our country, the most successful in terms of mortality. Nobody wrote it. It would be great if you wrote the truth, but let's get on with it because I want Mike to speak and then we'll take some more questions.
He's just said that we are the most successful nation in terms of death toll. We have a higher death toll than any other nation. The U.S. accounts for a quarter of all the world's coronavirus deaths.
Continue practicing social distancing. I encourage governors to follow a careful, phased approach, and I want to remind all Americans to adhere to our guidelines, very important. The governors are going to adhere, hopefully, or they're going to do what they think is best. I want them to do what they think is best, but ideally they'll adhere. Wash your hands, avoid close physical contact as much as possible, and wear a face covering when distancing is impractical. There are cases. We've flattened the curve and really made tremendous progress, but we must guard against a dangerous rebound. We don't want a rebound. That's so important. This is what we're just talking about. We don't want a rebound. The doctor doesn't want a rebound. These people definitely don't want a rebound. I don't think you want one, do you? Huh? You, especially. We don't want rebounds after all this death that we've suffered. Not work. I don't view work. I view it death. That was unnecessary. Should have never happened. Should have never left that little area where it started. You know it, and I know it, and they know it. In our all-out war against the virus, we continue to make great strides on testing.
So President Trump is again seeming to try to shift the blame to China.
The governors have never faced a situation like this before, but we're helping them find unused testing capacity within their states. Tremendous testing capacity that the governors in many cases didn't know they had. And additional capabilities are coming online every day. We're coming up with new equipment like the Abbott Laboratories equipment. On site, 5 minutes, great success. Everybody wants it. But you can only make so many of those machines, so we have many other forms of testing. We have many other machines that do it very quickly and by the millions. Our task force issued its reopening guidelines earlier than April 30th to give governors the time that they needed to develop testing capability and capacity and customize plans for their states, which many of them did. We've had some governors do a fantastic job on testing and on a lot of other things. I spoke, as you know, Governor Cuomo was here. We had a great conversation on testing yesterday, and they're doing a really good job in New York. We're working very closely with each of the states to help them succeed. I spoke earlier today with Governor Newsom, California, and that was all about testing that conversation. He's been scaling up really well, really good job. And I agreed to help him get some of the critical supplies that California needs to make use of the tremendous capacity that they found. This is a tremendous testing capacity.
He's mentioning the governor of California. Governors have been stepping in and showing federal leadership where the president has not been. Governor Newsom of California assembled the western states to work together to create their own guidelines for when and how to open. Governor Newsom suggested banding together to pool their purchasing power because it was too difficult for individual states to try to source medical equipment from suppliers. This is ideally exactly the thing that the federal government exists for, but in the federal government's absence, in the absence of their action, Governor Newsom took those steps.
They've been strong, resolute, but at the same time, he must do what he thinks is right. I want him to do what he thinks is right. But I disagree with him on what he's doing, but I want to let the governors do. Now, if I see something totally egregious, totally out of line, I'll do. But I think spas and beauty salons and tattoo parlors and barbershops in phase one, we're going to have phase two very soon, is just too soon. I think it's too soon. And I love the people. I love those people that use all of those things, the spas and the beauty parlors and barbershops, tattoo parlors. I love them. But they can wait a little bit longer, just a little bit, not much, because safety has to predominate. We have to have that. So I told the governor very simply that I disagree with his decision, but he has to do what he thinks is right. I'm excited to announce that in the coming weeks.
Now, this is potentially very positive news. It's very striking. President Trump has drawn a clear opposition to what the governor of Georgia is doing. I will note that it is interesting the difference in tone where he has said that he feels that the governor of Georgia is opening too soon, but again says, but I trust him. I leave it up to him. I wish he wouldn't do that, but I leave it up to him. Compare that to the Democratic governors that he's tweeting that his supporters should, quote, liberate their states. It seems that there is a much more aggressive tack when it is a Democratic governor that he disagrees with, especially when the Democratic governor is actually taking the more medically conservative actions.
This is a tribute to them, to our warriors, because they're equal warriors to those incredible pilots and all of the fighters that we have for the more traditional fights that we win, and we win. If we want to win, we always win. Sometimes we don't want to win, so we just go to a standstill. But that's always, that's not the way this country works. Operation America Strong.
This weird suggestion of sometimes we don't want to win seems to be some sort of a stab at previous administrations.
So just like military members in a time of war are fiercely running toward the fight, it's going to be great. I want to see those shows. I've seen them many times, and I can't get enough of them. And on July 4th, we'll be doing what we had at the mall, as you know. We're going to be doing it. Last year was a tremendous success, and I would imagine we'll do it. Hopefully I can use the term forever. That was a great success, as you remember. Even though it was pouring, it was raining so hard. It was raining. That was about as hard as I've seen in a while. But it was an amazing success. Didn't bother the pilots, didn't bother the military, didn't bother the crews that we had there. So we're going to be doing that again on July 4th. Our great military is operating at 100% during this crisis, and thousands of troops are deployed alongside of civilians in the COVID hotspots. As you know, you see them all over. When I spoke with Governor Cuomo, and when I spoke to...
He says that the military is operating at full force. I want to highlight that there are at least 1,500 cases of the coronavirus within the Defense Department, including at least over 800 active and reserve troops. Of those, at least 35 have been hospitalized, and I think these numbers do not take into account the outbreak of the coronavirus aboard the USS Roosevelt.
Respiratory technicians and professionals, it was an incredible thing. But everybody that saw them going to work said that was something special. So we're going to have some tremendous air shows all throughout our country, and that's in honor of what we're all going through together and the people that are helping us so much. And unfortunately, the people who have passed away from something that should never have been allowed to happen. Following around-the-clock negotiations yesterday, the Senate answered my call to replenish the Paycheck protection program so that millions of additional American workers can keep getting a paycheck. We just increased it by $310 billion. I urged the House to pass the bill without delay. In our first round of funding, we provided nearly $350 billion, and it went at record speed to American workers and small businesses.
Well, the president has not fairly laid out exactly how the Paycheck Protection Plan rolled out. Many people are calling it a botched rollout because of the difficulties involved. More than a quarter of all the small businesses that applied were not able to complete an application because banks were so overwhelmed. WNYC reported that just here in New York City, 84% of the small businesses in Brooklyn that applied, that successfully got their applications in, never received the funds because the funds ran out before they could be paid. Now, this renewal of funds should help with that, but they're still waiting at this time. The AP has reported that at least 75 major corporations, again, have taken advantage of these loans that were supposed to be for small businesses. One of them is Continental Materials, a company with over $100 million in sales last year. It still managed to qualify for a $5 million loan under this program. Major stakeholders in the company are the Gidwitz family. Ronald Gidwitz was a finance chair for President Trump's campaign and has since been named by President Trump as ambassador to Belgium.
Communities are very important. We're determined to protect our African American, Hispanic American, and minority workers who have been hit so hard by this hidden enemy. My administration is pursuing a comprehensive strategy to address the full spectrum of needs in these communities, supporting both health and economic revitalization. First, my administration is committed to providing the testing that is needed to fight the virus in distressed communities. In the last month alone, we have already sent over $1.4 billion to our nation's 13,000 community health care centers. Think of that, 13,000. To increase testing and treatment in the underserved areas. We're also expanding access to telehealth. Telehealth has become a big deal. You know, I've been reading about it for years, and all of a sudden, because of this, it's become a big thing. People can't leave their houses. They didn't want to leave their houses for various reasons, including they wanted to follow the guidelines. The legislation passed by the Senate yesterday, and I want to thank everybody. A great vote. Great. It's, as you know, it was a unanimous vote. How often do you see that? But the legislation passed by the Senate yesterday includes an additional $25 billion to further expand testing and provides even more funding for community health centers and various forms of epidemics and pandemics. And we'll be working on that because, you know, as per a couple of your statements and questions before, we want to work on that for the future. We hope this doesn't happen again ever. But last time was of this magnitude, 1917, that's a long time ago. So we want to be prepared. And we are prepared, and as I told you, we're building up hospital, not only our stockpile, which is being built up greatly, but also hospital stockpiles. We're getting them what they need. We're working out cost arrangements with them, and we're getting them a lot of the ventilators, which are the hardest thing for them to get, both from a cost standpoint and a technical standpoint. At the same time, we're also supporting the establishment of new testing sites focused on these communities. 40 sites have launched so far, and there are plans to launch dozens more in the next 3 weeks. We're coming up with testing apparatus and testing plans that are incredible when you look at the numbers. And some people are very, very big on testing, but some people are much less big than I am, I will tell you, and they're professionals.
I don't know exactly what the president is suggesting when he says that many professionals would prefer less testing. The uniform opinion of public health officials appears to be that widespread testing is the only way that we can know that we are containing this disease. As I've mentioned, medical experts at Harvard say that you would need to do about 500,000 to 700,000 tests a day from where we are now to get us at the point where you could safely reopen the country. We are doing about 150,000 a day. That amounts to just about 1.2% of the population having been tested.
It up by Mike, who's done incredible. I'll say it every time. I'll say it to anybody that wants to listen. Mike Pence has done an incredible job. Really an incredible job. Thank you. Is providing technical assistance to all 50 states through one-on-one phone calls as they develop and implement their plans. In addition, my administration is committed to restoring Black and Hispanic communities to full economic health. They want to be healthy economically and physically, and that's what we're doing. To that end, today I'm directing the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council, led by Secretary Ben Carson, to focus its effort on supporting underserved communities impacted by the coronavirus. And so Ben Carson is working on that with Mike and myself and a lot of other people. I'm going to ask Tim Scott, who was so helpful with the opportunity zones. That's an economic answer to a lot of problems, and Tim Scott was fantastic. And so I'm going to ask him to get involved with you, and sure he'll be willing to do it from South Carolina. I also asked the council to identify what additional funding will be required from Congress beyond what has already been provided. We're really building ourselves a strong base, and we're building ourselves a wall that's very different from the kind of walls that you've been hearing me talking about. But it's nevertheless, it in many ways performs the same function, and hopefully it's going to perform it equally as well. Furthermore, the council will seek input from the private sector and community leaders on how we can best support minority and distressed communities. As president, I'm absolutely determined to deliver a great future for Americans of every race, religion, color, and creed. Before our nation was attacked by this horrible enemy, our African American and Hispanic American citizens were prospering like never before. Best employment numbers ever. Not only African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, every American. We were breaking records at every level. We had almost 160 million people employed. We were never even close to that number. And we were also breaking them economically, highest stock market numbers, highest numbers of every kind. And I think we're going to be back there, and I think it's going to be much sooner rather than later, and I think we'll surpass those numbers, including our employment numbers. But I'll not rest until that prosperity has been fully restored. And again, I really believe that we're going to lift those numbers higher than ever before, and it won't be as long as people might think. A lot of very smart people are looking at that, and they're betting. You just have to look at what's going on with the stock market. In order to protect our great America.
The president seems to be presenting an overly rosy prediction of what the economic recovery from this current situation might be. He's pointing to the strength of the stock market. It did rise again today, but it is still about 5,000 points down for the year. It closed the Dow closed its worst quarter in 124 years at the end of the last quarter. And it's important to note that when the country does reopen for business, it's going to be carrying over $2 trillion of additional debt from the coronavirus packages that have been passed. And people are going to be reluctant to return to businesses, to restaurants, to stores, to theaters, if there is not sufficient testing to prove that it's actually safe to do so.
Safe. We want them to satisfy their family that safety is going to happen, and it will happen, and maybe even at a level like never before. We've learned so much, but we want them to enjoy these great national treasures as we continue to take reasonable precautions, and hopefully it'll be just reasonable. My administration has directed more than $7 billion in federal funding to support the development of treatments, diagnostics, and therapies, and that's something, doctors, I hope you can really work on. It's something so powerful and so important. The FDA, the NIH, and industry leaders are establishing master clinical trial protocols to test multiple promising new drugs at the same time, and we're doing a lot of testing right now. More than 1,600 locations across the country have signed up to administer convalescent plasma to patients, infusing them with antibodies of those who have recovered. And when they recover, I said it last time, practically the first thing they say is, I want to give my blood so that I can help other people. They want to give their blood. It's incredible. They're laying in bed. They're still in pretty weakened conditions, and they say, I want to give my blood, and that's happening all the time, isn't it? If you recovered from the coronavirus, I ask you to consider contacting your local blood or plasma donation center to arrange a donation that could potentially save many lives. With love for our nation and loyalty for our fellow citizens, we will safeguard our families, care for our neighbors, heal the sick, protect our workers, and build the future for a country that is the greatest country anywhere in the world, and we're only going to get greater. Thank you very much. Mike Pence, please.
So the president, when he's reading from his written statements, does tend to give messages of unity about how we will get through this together. And then when he speaks off the cuff, as will likely happen when he takes questions, he tends to then lash out, to blame and insult, and it is striking to see the difference. I do want to just note on the president's prediction that the economy is going to just come booming back. The president has a history of over-projecting economic growth. He ran for president promising that he would deliver 4% GDP every year. It has averaged about 2.5, which is not bad, to be honest, but it is lower than under either Reagan or Clinton.
Areas around the country that have been most impacted. Numbers remain low and steady on the West Coast, in Washington State and in California. The New York metro area, New Jersey, Connecticut, all appear to be past their peak. And as our scientists may reflect in a few moments, we also are seeing the positive rate going down, which is actually even as encouraging as the declining cases. The Detroit metro area appears to be past its peak. The Seattle metro area, as I mentioned, remains stable. New Orleans metro area is the most stable of all the large metro outbreaks.
Now, this is a lot of what the vice president is saying is true, but he's really painting a rosier picture than is the actual case. He's giving the impression that the national number of cases is coming down. That is not true. As I told you, there were 26,000 new cases since yesterday. It's just that the rate of new cases has been coming down. He highlighted that things are good in California, and yes, they are overall. However, Governor Newsom announced the state's highest single-day increase in cases since the outbreak began, reporting over 2,300 new cases yesterday. And the governor specifically said, I caution those, including local elected officials, that practicing social distancing has worked to keep those numbers relatively modest in terms of growth, but if we pull back too quickly, those numbers will go through the roof.
Fastest way, as President Trump has said many times, to get our country working again is to put the coronavirus in the past. And we are on our way to doing just that. You know, for early on, the president called forth not only the full power of the federal government, but he called forth the full weight of the American economy.
It is not true to say that the president either called early on or called the full weight of the power of the office. Governors, including Governor Cuomo, were calling desperately on him to enact the Defense Production Act, which would allow him to order, require, and commission manufacturing companies around the entire country to produce the medical supplies that were needed. President Trump did not invoke the Defense Production Act by name until late March. I think it was March 27th, and actually didn't invoke it, in fact, until later than that. And as a result, the ventilators that GM is producing aren't going to be done until August, when we hope that many of these areas will be past needing them. And it is also not true to say that he's done it fully, because he still has only called upon a few companies to do these things. He could have called on every apparel company in the country to begin producing masks and gowns, and then we wouldn't have nurses and doctors, nurses here in New York that we documented wearing garbage bags because they didn't have protective gowns. Also, I want to highlight, it is very sweet that the president wants to have military aircraft flyovers to honor those doctors, but the way you really honor them is with the equipment that you need. A flyover of the Blue Angels costs, or the Thunderbirds, our estimates are that it costs about $30,000. For that, under normal conditions, you could purchase over 51,000 N95 masks. I am sure that the doctors would much rather have those.
National Guard personnel through May 31. So we're going to continue to partner with states as the National Guard plays a vital role in testing and in cleaning nursing homes and in standing up states' response. Military personnel, Mr. President, we have more than 5,500 active duty military personnel, including, as of yesterday, 964 medical professionals in the uniform of the United States working in 17 hospitals in 7 states around the country. We're also very proud of our team at the VA. The VA has addressed its capacity issues. It's not seen cases among the veterans in its facilities increase, so they're deploying teams to focus on nursing homes. In Massachusetts, the VA personnel have disinfected 2 different nursing homes. In New Jersey, they literally taken over 2 state nursing homes and deployed 90 doctors and nurses. And in Florida, we're sending 16 teams to assist in nursing home operations. As the President also mentioned, in addition to what I saw yesterday in Madison, Wisconsin, we continue to build our strategic national stockpile. It's growing again with ventilators, on nearly 11,000 in supply. 901 new ventilators will be added, transitioned in the near term, and every American, I think, can be confident that should the need arise for your family member facing serious consequences from the coronavirus to need that equipment to help them breathe, that equipment will be there. As we said yesterday in Wisconsin, and you said, Mr. President, I think it should be a great source of comfort to every American that no American who has required a ventilator in the United States has been denied a ventilator.
We have evidence that that is not true. We have firsthand reports of ventilator rationing, and we don't know exactly how widespread that is, but the claim that the Vice President is making appears not to be true.
And the President reached out to the President and CEO of Walmart to ask Walmart to get in the gowns business. And Mr. President, I'm glad to report to you that we heard today at the task force that Walmart is producing 8.4 million gowns, and they will be delivered into our commercial supply to healthcare facilities around the country by the end of June.
By the end of June. Remember that when Vice President Pence says that the president acted early to use the full power of the government to get the supplies needed to doctors. At the end of June, Walmart will be providing gowns. Doctors need those now. The nurses who were wearing garbage bags here in New York needed those now, not in June.
America approach. And our message from the President's White House Coronavirus Task Force is to tell the American people it's working. We're getting there. We can see light at the end of the tunnel. We can see the day that we can reopen and put America back to work. But it's going to take all of us continuing to make the sacrifices necessary to practice those disciplines to get us to a place where we can reopen safely and confidently. With that, Mr. President, I'll call Dr. Fauci up for his reflections, and we'll move on.
So the Vice President says that we're getting there. The U.S. comprises about 4.25% of the world's population, but it now accounts for more than 32% of the coronavirus cases and 25% of the world's deaths. That is not quite getting there.
Remember a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the fact that we were going to have a really bad week because the deaths, particularly driven by the situation in New York, were going to get worse and worse. But yet, as that was happening, we were starting to see some turnaround, some flattening, and some coming down. As you've heard from Dr. Birx and will likely hear more, that is continuing. So what has happened is that the mitigation that we put in with the first 15 days and then the 30-day mitigation program of physical distancing worked. So it got us to where we are today. It is a successful formula. It is the basis for our being able to say that we can now think seriously about reopening America. And for that reason, we put together a carefully thought out and I believe well delineated and described program for opening up America again. And you know what it is. It's the guidelines that we announced a few days ago. Those very guidelines are based on a version of the successful formula that got us to where we are. So what I'm trying to say is that the program is not one that is going to be turn the lights on in America, we've finished. We're not. We have to proceed in a very careful, measured way. And if you look at the guidelines, they are careful and they are measured. There are certain checkpoints before you can even think about going into a phase one. And then things relax a little as you go into phase two, and relax a little and you go into phase three. Now, we live in a big country and it's heterogeneous, and there are different dynamics of outbreaks in different parts of the country. So the speed with which one can go from one to another, at the point at which you can even begin to think about the phase, is going to differ. So the one thing that I know, the urge we all have to get out there and get it over with, let's get back to normal, for a lot of good reasons, because there's a lot of suffering, economic and otherwise, in this country because of that. But again, as I've pleaded early on weeks ago, I plead with the American public, with the governors, with the mayors, for the people with responsibility. Although I know one has the need to leapfrog over things, don't do that. Do it in a measured way. This is a successful formula. The problem is, if we don't do that, there is a likelihood that we'll have a rebound. And the one way not to reopen the economy is to have a rebound that we can't take care of. So please, again, let me just close by pleading with the American public in general and those who are responsible leaders to carefully consider how we get back to normal. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about your expectations for the fall? We heard from Dr. Redfield and Dr. Birx. What do you see for the fall? Is it going to be embers or possibly no return of the virus at all?
You know, as I've said before here, when you look at an outbreak, It's two dynamic forces opposing each other. If you leave the virus to its own devices, it will take off if you do nothing to stop it. If you put into place the kinds of things that we talk about, first containment, and then hopefully you never get to mitigation, but containment is important. Those two forces are going to determine whether you're going to have a big outbreak. So what Dr. Redfield was saying, first of all, is that we will have coronavirus in the fall. I am convinced of that because of the degree of transmissibility that it has, the global nature. What happens with that will depend on how we're able to contain it when it occurs. And what we're saying is that in the fall, we will be much, much better prepared to do the kind of containment compared to what happened to us this winter. Now, the complicating issue is that unlike the syndromic and influenza-like observances that we have, that you could pick it up by clinically what's happening, it's going to get complicated by an influenza season. And I believe that's what Dr. Redfield was saying, that is going to be complicated. So whether or not it's going to be big or small is going to depend on our response. And that's what I think people sometimes have misunderstanding. Nobody can predict what is going to happen with an outbreak, but you can predict how you're going to respond to it. And that's really very important.
So you would caution against people thinking that in the fall there's not going to be coronavirus anymore and we won't have to worry about it. Or if it is, it'll be spotty and it won't be a big problem we have to worry about.
There will be coronavirus in the fall. If we do, which we won't, but let's take an imaginary period. We say, okay, coronavirus, forget about it. We're not going to do anything about it. It will take off. That's what viruses do. But that's not what's going to happen. We are going to respond to it to not allow it to do that.
Dr. Fauci, what happens when governors like Governor Kemp are not following this careful, measured plan and moving forward even without meeting the gating criteria?
Well, if I were advising the governor, I would tell him that he should be careful. And I would advise him not to just turn the switch on and go, because there is a danger of a rebound. And I know there's the desire to move ahead quickly. That's a natural human nature desire. But going ahead and leapfrogging into phases where you should not be, I would advise him as a health official and as a physician not to do that.
Okay? Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can you please give some details about the executive order? I know that the White House has just released a document. I haven't had a chance to review it.
Well, we can talk about that later. It's an executive order on immigration. We want Americans to have the jobs. We want Americans to have the health care. We want to take care of our citizens first. We have to. It's a very powerful order. It's for 60 days. At the end of 60 days, or maybe even during 60 days, I'll extend it or not, and I'll maybe change it. I might modify it. Yes?
Exemptions for immigrants who are already here, Mr. President?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Immigrants who are already here in the country or immigrants abroad who already effectively have a green card trying to get into the country and healthcare workers.
We're talking about immigrants that are trying to get in, and we're talking about people, and also, by the way, people that are coming in illegally. Now, as you know, because you've seen the numbers, our border, our southern border, is very, very tight. It hasn't been this tight in years. It's being helped by 160 more than that miles of wall that are going up. I'm trying to get to 450.
There are not 160 miles of wall. President Trump has repeatedly claimed that he's building a lot of wall. CBP confirmed in February that the total number of miles of new wall, not replacement of existing fencing, but new wall, was just 1 mile. Reuters suggests that it might have gone up as high as 3 miles, but we were talking 1 to 3 miles of wall, not 160 some.
In many ways, including on what we're doing with COVID. And as you know, we have a very good trade arrangement with Mexico now, which we didn't have before. So I want to thank the President of Mexico, in particular for the 27,000 soldiers. They're doing a fantastic job.
For healthcare workers, sir? You want to talk about the exemptions for healthcare
Yeah,
workers?
we want to protect our healthcare workers, and that's one of the other reasons we're doing this. Yes, John?
Mr. President, I wanted to ask you about Rick Bright. He's the head of the federal agency in charge of getting a vaccine out to Americans once it's ready. He says he has been pushed out of his job because he raised questions about hydroxychloroquine and some of your directives on that. Was he pushed out of that job?
I never heard of him. You just mentioned a name. I never heard of him. When did this happen?
This happened today.
Well, I never heard of him. If the guy says he was pushed out of a job, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. You'd have to hear the other side. I don't know who he is. Please.
And on the
This is one of the top officials at Health and Human Services. It was a little disheartening that President Trump says that he doesn't know who he is.
Like we did last year. Given what the doctors are just saying that, coronavirus is still going to be out there, it might not be as bad as it is now, but it's still going to be circulating. Is that going to be safe to have that many people on the mall?
We're going to probably have 25% of what we had last year. Last year, as you know, was maxed out. I saw a magnificent picture of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I saw a magnificent picture of our event last year, and both of them were maxed out. It was beautiful to see, beautiful, very similar. This year, most likely, we'll be standing 6 feet apart. We'll have to do that in a very, very interesting way, and maybe we'll even do it greater, so we'll leave a little extra distance. But if we do that, we'd certainly do that. I don't see maybe the purpose if we can't do that. We have to have people, thousands. We had tens of thousands. Most of you were there. Tens of thousands of people last year. It was incredible. And it was, to an extent, an air show of all the different aircraft flying over. We even had Air Force One flying over. So ideally, it would be wonderful if we could actually have it as it was last year. And eventually we will have that. I think it's important to know, eventually we are going to have that. Your stadiums are going to be the way they've been for the last 100 years. No, I know, but your stadiums, as an example, sports, going to be the way they used to be. I mean, I told one of the owners, he said, do you think I should take out seats? I said, no, you shouldn't take out seats. We're going to have it the way it was. We're going to be back. This virus will eventually be gone. And if it should show up in the fall, we're going to put it out very fast. We have great people. We're going to put it out very fast because we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about how to deal with this, and we'll put it out very fast. Yeah, please. Just nice and easy.
We talk a lot about testing capacity, and governors agree that that exists, but it's very different from testing implementation. And they are still begging for you to use your full authority to help them get reagents and other things. As you would like to say, what do you have to lose by helping them do that?
Well, I am doing
and becoming the king of testing?
And let me just say, we are the king of testing already. There's no country in the world that's done more. Not even
0.2% of the population has been tested. Is that good enough?
I just said there's no country in the world that's done more. And we have tests that have already come out that are going to be introduced very shortly that will do it more. My problem is this. It's very much of a media trap. Whether we did 2%, 5%, 50% or 100%, it'll never be enough, no matter what. Now, with the expertise and
this is what he's saying is not true. There actually are numbers that have been speculated by medical experts. Harvard says that if we were testing between 500,000 to 700,000 people a day, that would be enough to get a grip of where we are now. We are doing about 150,000 a day. This claim that it would never be enough is paranoid.
the governors were complaining, some of the governors, I must say, and it was very much along party lines for the most part, but except for one, when the governors were complaining, we said, no, how many do you need? We need 50, we need 100. One governor asked for many, many, many thousands, and it turned out they didn't need that, and that's good. We got them, and nobody that needed a ventilator, you know this, and we went through this with the governors, that needed a ventilator didn't get a ventilator. That was an incredible achievement. With testing it.
That is not a fact that nobody who needed a ventilator didn't get one. It is also not a fact that the criticism was on party lines. We have documented many Republican governors who were complaining that they did not have what they needed.
They didn't want to do that. We got the highest quality. But testing, it's like no matter how well you do, you can always say more. With the ventilators, they either have them or they don't. In fact, we went to one meeting. Who wants a ventilator? One governor said, we'd like 25. 25, you got them. Who else? Nobody spoke up. That was 4 weeks ago. So that was great. The problem with the testing is, and I said, if we test 350 million people, you'll say, no, we want them to have a second test or a third test or a fourth test. Not everybody believes as strongly as some people in testing. Some people want to do testing because they think it's impossible for us to fulfill that goal. That's easy compared to...
This is a baseless claim. President Trump is making a baseless claim that the reason people are demanding more tests is because they think he can't do it. That is the sort of thing that that is the sort of thinking that most people in most instances would describe as paranoid.
What they want with the testing, but again, testing, and I've said it from the beginning, the actual test has to be administered locally. You can't do from Washington or faraway locations federal testing nearly as well as you can where you have a governor and he has mayors and they have representatives and they know the back of a Walmart. Put it in the parking lot in the back of a Walmart or put it in a certain location in different states. They're doing it beautifully. It's working beautifully. The relationship I have with the governors, and Mike has, and we all have with the governors, I would say other than one or two, but even them, they don't complain. They're not complaining. So we're doing tremendous testing, and ultimately we're doing more testing, I think, than probably any of the governors even want. Okay, please.
Back on the immigration,
It is simply not true to say that we are doing more testing than any of the governors want. Multiple governors have talked about how frustrated and how dangerous it is that they don't have enough tests, and this includes Republican governors like the Republican governor of Nebraska, who said that it's been a challenge to get the supplies he needs to do these tests, like the Republican governor of Wyoming, who said that it's a perilous set of circumstances that he's in because of his inability to do tests, like the Republican governor of Maryland, who became so frustrated with the inability to get tests from the federal government that he and his wife secretly negotiated a deal with labs in North Korea to get South Korea, but with labs in South Korea to get 500,000 tests from South Korea. It is just not true what the president is saying there.
We don't want to hurt our businesses, and we don't want to hurt our farmers. Very important.
Can I ask you about your conversation with Governor Kemp? What did he say to you when you said you strongly disagreed with him? And for gym owners and tattoo parlor artists and barbers in Atlanta and in Georgia generally, would you advise them to listen to you and not to their governor?
Look, I'd like them to listen to their governors, all of their governors. I have the right to do if I wanted to clamp it down, but I have respect for our governors. They know what they're doing. I think, and as you know, Brian Kemp, governor of Georgia, I worked very hard for his election. He beat their superstar. He beat the superstar of their party. I think you can say I helped a lot. Michelle Obama, Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, they all went in. They campaigned for him very, very hard. And he lost. He also was way down in a primary and he ended up winning a primary after I came out and endorsed him. So a lot of good things, and there's a lot of good feeling between myself and Brian Kemp. I like him a lot. I happen to disagree with him only in time and timing. I disagree. When you have spas, beauty parlors, and I love these people. I know the people from spas and beauty parlors, tattoo parlors, bikers for Trump, a lot of tattoos. I love them. I love these people. And barbershops. These are great people. But you know what? Maybe you wait a little bit longer till you get into a phase two. So do I agree with him? No. But I respect him, and I will let him make his decision. Would I do that? No. I'd keep him a little longer. I want to protect people's lives. But I'm going to let him make his decision. But I told him I totally disagree. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Vice President in his remarks was talking about the federal efforts that have been undertaken as it relates to nursing facilities. And as you both know, they've been just so incredibly hard hit, just tragic, over 10,000 COVID-19 deaths so far. The industry says that they're struggling as it relates to testing. Can you commit to increasing testing at the nursing facilities?
Yeah, well, we're doing that automatically. I mean, that's almost common sense, but we're doing that automatically. I mean, you look at the state of Washington. That was our first glimpse of it. They got hit so horribly in that nursing home. It seemed like everybody was from a particular nursing home. So we knew immediately that was going to be a problem, and we're doing that 100%. We're taking very special care of our nursing homes and our seniors, other than me. Other than me. Nobody wants to take care of me. But other than me, we're taking care of our seniors.
Another area. Thank you, Mr. President.
No, it's just an enormously important question. And we want to thank the American people who have been putting off visits to their grandmothers and grandfathers and moms and dads. It's tough. I'm going to be in Indiana next week, and I'm not going to go see my mom. She lives in her own home, but people get it, that the risk of serious illness for a healthy American of the coronavirus is fairly low. You'll either have flu-like symptoms or no symptoms at all. But as we've said so many times at this podium, and the American people get it, a healthy American could inadvertently convey the coronavirus to a senior with an underlying health condition and have the kind of heartbreaking results that we've seen in nursing homes around the country. It's the reason why from early on the President took decisive action to raise the infectious disease standards at every nursing home in America. He deployed all 8,000 of our inspectors, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, to dedicate all of their time to ensuring compliance with those new higher standards. We've spoken about nursing home issues with governors around the country, and frankly, there are governors around the country that have done remarkable work with nursing homes. You mentioned Governor Brian Kemp. He actually used the National Guard in Georgia. He deployed them to nursing homes to do cleaning and to disinfect areas of those nursing homes, and it's a tremendous service. But to your point about testing, if you look carefully at the guidelines, Open Up America again, you will see that in phase one, the level of testing that we contemplate is first that we want to be able to test anyone who has the symptoms that may be coronavirus and be able to test them quickly. Secondly, we want to do the kind of contact tracing, and Dr. Redfield and his team are deploying CDC teams in every state in America to be able to find out everyone that that person has been in contact with and test them. But if you look right underneath that, what we're directing states to do is be prepared to deploy testing resources first and foremost to nursing homes and long-term care facilities so that we can monitor any potential outbreak of the coronavirus among the most vulnerable population. Thanks to the leadership of our Surgeon General, as the President announced today, we're also going to be deploying testing resources to vulnerable communities, to underserved communities. The CDC released new preliminary data on the impact, particularly on African American communities in this country, and it's the reason why part of our phase one recommendation is that we deploy testing resources into those communities that are described by the doctors as socially vulnerable. And even as we speak, we'll announce next week that we're already in the process of deploying testing. And so it's a good opportunity to remind every American to be especially careful around our seniors, to heed the guidance about avoiding visitations, health of those who are most vulnerable. But the American people can be assured that from phase one forward, all the way through phase three and reopening, we're going to be helping to guide the states to focus on the most vulnerable, beginning with our seniors with serious underlying health conditions.
Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commercial labs say that they need to buy new diagnostic machines to be able to double their testing capacity. Your administration has said that there's enough testing capacity to double overnight. How do you kind of square that difference?
Very easy. They can get new machines if they want, but even if they didn't, we have tremendous testing capability. You take a look at what's happening in California and New York. Governor Cuomo told us very strongly, he said, wow, we have a lot of labs. You know, it's a research center of the world. They have tremendous. In California, too, long conversations. They have tremendous testing capability there, too. Now, if they want to increase it, they can increase it, but they have plenty right now. You saw the maps the other day where we put up the different sites in various states, and virtually all states are like that. How about you with the mask?
Yes,
Nice that you wear a
Mr.
mask.
President, may I actually follow up on those maps from the other day? On Monday, a reporter for a local television station in Miami sent me a question asking if it was possible to get the information on those maps distributed to the media so that local TV stations and newspapers can check on that information. So if that could be done.
Do you want to do that? Do you want to say something?
Thank you for talking about testing and testing capacity, because we have been talking about that for several weeks, because we could see, and we did a full inventory of every single state and every single laboratory. And I also appreciate you talking about the implementation piece of the testing capacity. And it's complicated. So we have a team calling every lab and working through the American Society of Microbiology, as I mentioned before, to really work with every lab director to see what the issues are in each laboratory. And I just want to thank Administrator Verma, who really worked on increasing the funding for this test and uniquely doubling the funding for the coronavirus nucleic acid test. From $50 to $100 to really address some of the issues about laboratory technicians, because sometimes we think these tests run themselves. They don't. They actually need people to help with the machines. So we were talking about purchasing more machines. We actually need to have additional laboratory technicians to really be able to work all of those machines. And so it's lab by lab, state by state, and that's the dialogue that's going on now to unlock the full potential of the United States. Maybe the testing would not be needed at this moment, and maybe it is, but we want it also totally available in the fall if it comes to an issue where we have to distinguish between flu and COVID-19. So we're building infrastructure and capacity not only for today but for tomorrow, and really showing a new way to really deal with pandemics and bring testing to scale, because the country has never had to do this before. I mean, if you look at some of the other countries, they're struggling with some of the issues from PPE to testing, and so this is a universal issue, but we're working on it as a collective to really have a very innovative and integrated way to approach testing.
But without building new, they have tremendous capability.
And the maps are, I will ask the companies, because obviously it's proprietary where every single machine is. And, you know, if you have that machine and 5 others, maybe you don't want to let that person know you have 5 others. It's kind of like Coke and Pepsi. So I think we're working very deliberately to really be able to share those maps. The governors, I can tell you that all of the state governors and the mayors have those maps, and the addresses and the type of machine for every single laboratory in their jurisdictions, so that they know.
The governors were not aware that those laboratories were available to them.
Dr. Before you leave, on the state of California is now partially broken with CDC restrictions on who would get guidance on who should get testing, because they want to test people without any symptoms at all in high-risk environments like a nursing home. Do you agree with this? Vice President Pence, do you agree with this?
Not only do we agree with it, it was in our guidelines. That was fundamental to our guidelines, and I think we were the first group that said testing asymptomatics will be key. We've always said that we think that's a significant contribution to infections, and we went to the places where we thought it was most critical to find cases the earliest, and so that is where we have asked states in the guidelines to start with nursing home, indigenous peoples, and people in underserved areas in cities, to really ensure that we're monitoring for any type, because we know the asymptomatic piece may be the tip of the iceberg, in fact be the iceberg underneath the surface. And so if you're only seeing cases, maybe this. But in parallel, we're working with states and local governments to really define what that population is, by doing, in collaboration with states, working with them together to really reinforce this antibody testing, but in a careful way where you do 2 antibody testing to increase your sensitivity and specificity into the 99+% range, because we think it's really important that you have a very high quality test, but a high quality test that you can really tell someone that they've had this before. And so we're waiting to have those 2 tests that we can do in series to really assure people. But that was in the guidelines from the very beginning, and we think it's fundamental both for right now and going through the fall, because that will be our early alert if any of the COVID virus reappears.
How much more testing are we going to
You
need?
didn't know that was in the guidelines?
The CDC
Well,
criteria
it's
says
currently in the
that.
CDC guidelines. So you're saying
I thought it's right in the guidelines.
Dr. Burke,
Surprised that-
while you're there, can I
Jerome,
just...
would you like to say something in that, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. And I just want to reiterate to everyone that the task force and the administration have a commitment to protecting vulnerable people. And that includes in the area of testing. We've had the opportunity to talk to many different groups, and we hear that testing is absolutely a concern. And we'll be giving you more details in the coming days, but I just want you to know that we're building on the public-private partnership that the President rolled out with pharmacy and retail companies like CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid, Walmart, and Kroger to accelerate testing for more Americans in more communities across the nation. We're going to be increasing access to testing for under-tested, underserved, and minority communities, and we're working closely with partners and states to establish sites in areas most in need of increased access to testing. We're using data. CDC provided data to locate sites in counties that are under-tested and socially vulnerable, especially with high populations of Black, Hispanic, rural, and Native Americans. We're using the CDC's vulnerability index, as you heard about earlier, to select sites. This measures the resilience of communities when confronted by external stressors along 4 main themes: socioeconomic status, household composition, and disability, minority status, and housing type. Our goal is to have about 2/3 of these initial sites located in counties with moderate to high social vulnerability, and about 1/4 of these sites in counties with high social vulnerability. So again, I want communities that are vulnerable to understand that we are strategically and intentionally making sure we're deploying testing in those areas so that people can get identified if they have symptoms, can get identified if they are asymptomatic, and that we will be able to deploy resources appropriatly.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I have a quick follow-up for Dr.
And I have to
Burke.
say, our Surgeon General is doing a great job. Thank you. Great job. Really good. OAN in the way.
Mr. President, thank you.
President Trump is taking a question from the fringe conspiracy theorist media outlet OAN.
Our military, when it comes to Iranian aggression, are you going to change formally rules of engagement for our U.S. military so that they can engage?
We're covered 100%. We don't want their gunboats surrounding our boats and traveling around our boats and having a good time. We don't want them anywhere near our boats. And so you know the order I gave. I don't think I have to say it again, but I've given that order. Under the Obama administration, it was taking place all the time. Under my administration, I gave this order early on, and nothing happened. They were very nice. There was no problem. But then I noticed yesterday they did that in a much lighter form, but they did that again. I said, we're not going to stand for it. So if they do that, that's putting our ships at danger and our great crews and sailors in danger. I'm not going to let that happen. And we will. They'll shoot them out of the water.
The U.S. military does not have to change its rules of engagement in order to follow your...
No, that's the rules of engagement. That's a threat when they get that close to our boat. And they have guns. They have very substantial weapons on those boats. But we'll shoot them out of the water. Okay? Please.
Thank you, President Trump. If possible, I'd like to ask a question to Dr. Fauci and then a very different one to you. To Dr. Fauci, today the CDC and the USDA said that the first pets in America had tested positive for the coronavirus. What does that mean, and what should the public know about that?
Pets?
Pets, 2 pets.
So that question was asked before, but I'll be happy to answer it again. Certainly, animals, pets, can get infected. Big cats in zoos have been reported to be infected with coronavirus. There's no evidence that the virus is transmitted from a pet to a human. Now, obviously, is that impossible? I mean, biologically, anything is possible, but there's no evidence whatsoever that we've seen from an epidemiological standpoint that pets can be transmitters within the household. So it's not surprising. I mean, when you have viruses that can infect multiple species, isolating it from an animal doesn't necessarily mean the animal is transmitting it.
What about the lion in the New York Zoo?
Yeah, well, that's the lion in the New York.
How did that happen?
It probably happened. I don't know, Mr. President, but I would imagine that one of the zookeepers probably had an asymptomatic infection, took care of the animal, gave him some food, touched him or whatever, and that's how we got it.
Thank you. And President Trump, my question for you, President Trump, my question for you is, earlier in these briefings, you talked a lot about giving Americans hope, and you wanted to focus on that. But now that the crisis seems to perhaps be lessening, I wanted to ask you about accountability. And of course, millions of Americans became familiar with you as the tough boss who fired people for doing a poor job. I wanted to ask you about two specific things. There's a report from Reuters today that the HHS secretary put a former dog breeder in charge of day-to-day coronavirus efforts to begin with, and also on Reuters reported today that Alex Azar, the secretary of HHS, put a former dog breeder, that was his most recently former job, in charge of day-to-day operations of the coronavirus.
Well, I don't know, but you just tell me something. What's the second?
And the second one is on face masks. Taiwan has a bigger population than New York State. Early on, they had universal wearing of face masks.
No problem with face masks if the governors want to do that. We ordered, I don't know if you know, 500 million face masks. We have hundreds of millions right now. And if people want to wear them, it's up to the governors. If the governors want that, it's up to them. Now, it's more appropriate in some states, obviously, than others. You have the big plains, and you have certain states where it's much less necessary. But that's up to the governors, and we have that very well covered. I think face masks. But
people are wearing masks.
We have hundreds of millions of face masks, and we have at least 500 million. That's a lot. We'll have them very shortly.
Lots of people are wearing face masks now that the federal government advised it. It was almost overnight. But less than a month ago, our Surgeon General said that, and I'm quoting, they're, quote, not effective in preventing the general public from catching coronavirus. Should there be accountability there, and also for the HHS secretary?
Well, I don't know. Would anybody like to speak about it? I think, just so you understand, if somebody wants to wear them, I'm all for it. Would somebody like to
I've got a few things to say about this, but I don't want to interrupt because I'm interested for all of us to hear what they have to say.
Masks, and I think it's important when we came out with the CDC guidance about face masks, or what we called face coverings, was in recognition of the growing understanding of asymptomatic infection or pre-symptomatic infection, was the recognition that we could use a barrier. And the reason, and I have mine when I'm in public, right here, that I use, that this barrier, in case I was in fact infected, if I didn't know, is a barrier to prevent me to protect you, in case I happen to be asymptomatically infected. There's very good data to show that the ability of viral particles to go through a barrier is substantially diminished. And that's why we recommended these face coverings. I think if you go back to when CDC came out with that recommendation, some people may think intuitively it's to protect them from getting infected. No, it was to protect you from potentially getting infected by me when I go out in public. Jerome, do you?
I actually appreciate you asking that question because it's one that that we've had to clarify several times, and I understand why the American public has been confused over time. As Dr. Redfield mentioned, initially we said, based on CDC, World Health Organization, and most other major public health organizations, that the public needed to know that these masks were not effective or shown to be effective in preventing you, if you wear a mask, from catching coronavirus. Another important thing to remember is the context of those statements was a run on medical masks, on N95 masks, and our healthcare workers were at risk. What's changed? What's changed is we found out that unlike past viruses that are spread through the respiratory route, a significant proportion of coronavirus cases can be traced back to asymptomatic spread. So the task force deliberated this. We've always told you that we will look at the facts and we will give people recommendations based on the best available evidence at the time. And once we saw that asymptomatic spread, we said, well, masks still aren't effective, and from our point of view at preventing you from catching coronavirus in a significant way. But we've always told people that they should wear masks if they know they have symptoms to prevent them from spreading to other people. Well, now that we know about 25 to 50% of people are spreading asymptomatically, we suggested people wear cloth facial coverings to prevent asymptomatic spread. You wear your mask to protect me. I wear my mask, and Dr. Redfield mentioned it. I've got my mask. I believe I have mine on me, Bob. I carry mine around with me, too. I wear my mask to protect you. We're 6 feet away, which is why I'm not wearing my mask to protect you now, and we also all have been tested. So that's why I'm not wearing mine now.
Yeah, but I'm right next to you.
Well, I'll put mine on if you want me to, sir. But again...
Well, the president makes a very good point, which is that he and his team do not demonstrate their own social distancing. You look at the governors holding press conferences, they are all 6 feet away from the people near them. Look at how close the President of the United States is standing to the Vice President. That's simply remarkable. Now, all right, so a couple things on the issues of masks. So President Trump said that we have all the masks that we need. It is not true. It is not true. It's just not true. Hospitals around the country are having terrible shortages of masks. There are a lot of reasons for this. It is largely because the president did not invoke the Defense Production Act early on and require apparel manufacturers to start producing masks, and because he did not put the federal government in charge of getting medical supplies where they were needed. He told on March 16th, governors, ventilators, masks, all this stuff, get it on your own. And so they have been bidding against each other. Governor Cuomo has talked about how the price of an N95 mask went up from roughly 60 cents to over $7, which when you're buying millions of masks is a lot. Now, also, the CDC has, since April 3rd, suggested that people wear masks. The very same day that they rolled out those new guidelines, President Trump said he wouldn't do it. And then finally, he said that it's not necessary in rural areas because rural areas aren't having a problem. Rural areas are having a problem. And in fact, because rural areas are not taking social distancing guidances seriously, they are seeing while they may have fewer cases overall, they are seeing a much greater increase in cases. I want to highlight some states that do not have stay-at-home orders in place. Arkansas has had its number of cases nearly triple in the last 3 weeks. Iowa and Nebraska more than quadrupled their cases in the last 2 weeks. South Dakota's cases are 7 times what they were 2 weeks ago.
Right now, 184, the COVID. No, we have a problem.
It's 185 nations, by the way. He just said that it's 184 that have the coronavirus.
Now I hear it's 540, of which one's died and a few are very sick, but most of them are back in great shape. But we did lose one, and it attacked the lungs of that young person. And then we also had a number that were quite sick, but they're all either better or getting better, but most of them are better for a long time already. Okay, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you know, over the course of the past few weeks, there have been the closures of several meat processing companies across the country in several states. Yeah. Is this a concern to you? Are you going to increase testing in these facilities?
Look at South Dakota, how well the governor's. Yeah, look at South Dakota, how well the governor's done there, and all of a sudden you have a big spike in one.
How well the governor has done. The governor of South Dakota has refused to put stay-at-home orders in place, and as I just told you, South Dakota has 7 times the number of cases, more than 7 times the number of cases it had 2 weeks ago.
1 or 2 of the plants, actually.
Is the food supply secure?
Yes, totally secure. It's in great shape. In the back, here you go.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Attorney General in the state of Missouri filed a law case against China. Accusing it of lying and covering up about the origin of the virus. Yeah. Do you support that? And do you call
Well, I haven't seen the case. I know about the case. He filed a case against China. I love Missouri, as you know. It's great. But I'm going to take a look at it. I actually know about it very much. I have to take a look at it. I have not seen the case in terms of reading it, but I will be doing that.
Call for international investigation.
Well, we're going to have to take a look. Oh, we're doing investigations. We're doing our own. But I do want to see and review that lawsuit. I'm sure that won't be the last one. Yeah.
I just had a follow-up question for Dr. Fauci, if you don't mind.
Yes, sure.
I'm happy to ask you one after. John had asked the president about Rick Bright, and he said he wasn't sure who that was, but I'm sure you're familiar who he is since he was the head of BARDA. So there's this concern or an accusation he's raised that he was removed from his job because he protested widespread use of hydroxychloroquine. Are you familiar with this situation, and do you feel like public health experts feel they are able to speak publicly or to speak out in opposition to things? Yeah. So you don't feel like there's any concern among people at the NIH right now or in the public health community?
At the NIH? Absolutely not.
Dr. Fauci, knowing Dr. Bright and knowing what his gifts are as one of the country's leading experts on vaccines, are those gifts best suited at NIH rather than BARDA? What's he going to be doing with you?
What is he going to be doing at the NIH?
Are his gifts best suited to work with you rather than BARDA?
I don't really think I can comment on somebody's relative gifts. I mean, he's going to be at the NIH and he's going to be responsible. From what I hear, again, this is what I've heard, that he's going to be responsible for the development of diagnostics, which is very, very important. The NIH is going to be involved in trying to develop new generation diagnostics, which we feel is going to be very important for the future of being able to facilitate the kinds of things that now are sometimes problematic.
And why do you say he has great gifts or gifts? What, do you know him? No, but have you reviewed him? Have you studied him? Have you reported on him? You said his gifts. I mean,
his entire career.
Well, that doesn't mean you have gifts. I know a lot of people, they play baseball, but they can't hit 150 in the major leagues.
The flu vaccine last year.
No, but you talk about his great gifts. Go ahead, please.
This was the doctor who was leading the charge on developing a coronavirus vaccine. President Trump has been saying all along that we are making great strides on this vaccine. So presumably you think that he would know that Dr. Bright is in fact talented and bright. So the situation there, Bright had led the Biomedical Advanced Research Development Authority since 2016 until Tuesday when he was reassigned to a narrower position. And he announced that he will file a whistleblower complaint with the Department of Health and Human Services Inspector General. He told the New York Times, "I believe this transfer was in response to my insistence that the government invest billions of dollars allocated by Congress to address the COVID-19 pandemic into safe and scientifically vetted solutions and not in drugs and vaccines and other technologies that lack scientific merit." And this was at a time when President Trump ordered FEMA to purchase hundreds of millions of doses of hydroxychloroquine because he felt personally that it was effective at treating coronavirus without any substantiated medical support for that opinion. President Trump has financial ties to two of the companies that produce hydroxychloroquine. The latest research suggests that it is not effective, and in fact, in the most widespread tests done so far, more people who took it died than people who didn't take it.
But we all have fun because we're talking about something very important. The main thing is, I think we're getting to a lot of solutions. We never want this to happen again. We never want this to happen again, what happened. And if it should come back in some form, we want to snuff it out very quickly before anything can happen. And I personally hope it doesn't come back in the fall as a combination of the flu or not as a combination of the flu. But I think we learn a lot. And, you know, some of these questions are good. Some of them are ridiculous, frankly, but some of them are I think some of them are very important questions. Very important. You know, when you asked Dr. Fauci about the right to speak, if I let him speak, I'll let anybody speak. And we love him. Let's go.
Mr. President, Senator McConnell said today that he would prefer to see states that have high public pensions declare bankruptcy rather than taking on more.
I heard he said that. I don't know what he said. I'll have to call him and ask him.
That's what he said.
Well, that's okay. I'm going to have to look at it directly.
We're Would you agree with him on that?
I can't tell you that. I have to see, I want to base it on fact and reason. I want to see what he said, why he said it and how he said it. I'd have to watch him say it. But some of the states are not doing well, let's face it. And some are doing phenomenally well. A state where Mike was governor, Indiana, I looked at their numbers. It's incredible what they're doing. Some states are doing fantastically well. Iowa's doing great. You have states doing well, and you have some states that aren't doing well. We know the ones. I don't have to mention the ones that aren't doing well, but you do have states that are in trouble. And certainly they're coming back to talk to us. We'll see what happens.
Are you concerned, sir, about the growing U.S. national debt as a result of these stimulus
Well, we had no
packages?
choice. Do we have a choice? Yeah, I'm always concerned about everything. We had to fix this problem. We were attacked. This was an attack. This wasn't just, oh, gee. And this wasn't the flu, by the way. They like to say the flu. Nobody's ever seen anything like this. 1917 was the last time. We were attacked. We had the greatest economy in the history of the world. We had the greatest economy, better than China, better than any place. They will tell you that. I dealt with them for a long time, and they will tell you we had the greatest economy. We built it in the last 3 years, 3.5 years. We built it. And then one day they came and they said, you have to close it. I said, you got to be, these people right here. They said, you have to, they came into my office, into the Oval Office, and they said, we have to close the economy. I said, let's explain this. Explain this to me. The greatest ever in history.
The economy was not the greatest in history. By many, many metrics, it has been stronger at other times. President Trump also just made a big point of saying this isn't like the flu. It's nothing like the flu. As recently as March 9th, he was still comparing it to the flu.
2 months ago, we're having the best year they've ever had. Now, all of a sudden, they're totally shut out of markets. There was a great spirit today. The fact is some of the governors are opening up their states. And I saw it. I feel it. I don't know if you folks feel it. I feel it. There was a great spirit today. I don't know. The stock market was up today, I guess.
The stock market was up some today, but it is still down over 5,000 points since the start of the year.
I feel much different today than I did 2 or 3 days ago. And I think the world does. We spoke to a lot of leaders. The world feels that we're really leading a path of optimism. European Union's having a lot of difficulty. You take a look at what's going on with the European Union. It's having tremendous difficulty. But we're going to be back, and we're going to be back stronger than ever. We're going to be at a level, I think, that everybody's going to be and they do. They look up to us. They want to know, what are we doing? What are we doing with therapeutics? What are we doing with vaccines? We're going to have those answers, too.
It is just not true to suggest that the rest of the world would like to be looking to us as a model of how to act. We have 32% of the world's coronavirus cases and over 25% of the world's coronavirus deaths.
That nobody's ever even seen before. They've never seen where we are right now. You don't have to build new machines. You don't have to build new labs. We already have them. But some of the labs are even upgrading to be able to double and triple their capacity in one case. We're at a level that nobody's ever been. We're going to be bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. So I'm not concerned about that. Thank you very much.
Would you change your mind if Dr. Tedros was replaced?
Dr. Burke?
Okay, so that is today's coronavirus briefing. It was an interesting one. Fewer reporters got shouted down than in some of the recent ones. One of the highlights, I would say, today is that President Trump made a big deal at the beginning of bringing out CDC Director Redfield to refute the Washington Post story in which he was quoted as saying that he believed that the coronavirus would be back in the fall. President Trump said that the quote was false. Redfield came out and actually confirmed that the quote was accurate. He said that he is expecting to see the coronavirus return in the fall. Dr. Birx said today that she was expecting it, and Dr. Fauci used the most unequivocal language, saying, we will have coronavirus in the fall. I am convinced of that. President Trump made a number of other misleading or false claims. At the speed at which they came, we weren't able to get to all of them, but I do want to circle back to this one where he suggested that Governor Kemp won his race in Georgia solely because of his endorsement, that he was some sort of an underdog. I want to highlight that Kemp narrowly won in a traditionally red state after widespread election irregularities in an election he presided over as Secretary of State. His office presided over the cancellations of nearly 600,000 voter registrations that numerous reports said disproportionately impacted black voters. And that is more of the account of what happened. Also, some 8% of the state's polling places were closed, disproportionately in black areas, leading to long waits for poll times. And these attributes likely played a larger role than President Trump's endorsement, although I am sure that in a red state, President Trump's endorsement did not hurt. President Trump ended this by saying that he feels so much better about where we are now versus where we are 3 days ago. There is cause for hope. I want to hold on to the cause for hope. We are seeing, especially here in New York, a slowing of new cases, but that doesn't change the fact that there were 26,000 new cases since yesterday and 2,100 new American deaths since yesterday. The death toll to date is over 46,000. That is more than 10 times the Iraq War. So, that is a lot to take in. It is a lot to process. I want to thank you for joining us. I am the senior politics producer at NowThis, Alan Piper. I had support from our full team today, most especially from Emily Barger, Brandon Caruso, Maddie Green, Kavish Harjai, Ian McKenna, Nico Pitney, and Shelby Vacalin. To everyone out there, please stay safe, take care of yourself. Please check in on the people that you care about, and please let the people that you love know how much you love them. We are in a dark time, but we will get through this together. If the president is back tomorrow, we will be back to fact check. I will see you then. Thank you and good night.